risk of coming off like I'm trying to sound like an authority on the subject, this video can we'll say, perhaps serve as somewhat of a history lesson for anyone who may care. And since metalheads, or just music heads in general, always seem to require some sort of resume before hearing somebody out, I'll gladly summarize mine as a listener. What prompted this is that the lineup for Milwaukee Metal Fest continues to be finalized and includes some bands I've been hearing about for years, but never actually bothered to listen to for whatever reason. And I'm finding out now that some of these bands are considered metalcore. So given that I've always listened to a ton of hardcore at least, and spent a lot of time at shows in my teen years, I got to witness the sprouting of what would eventually come to be known as metalcore. And I figured I'd spew from my historical perspective. But again, I know none of that'll mean shit unless I state my credentials first, so here goes. A good portion of my youth growing up in New Hampshire was also spent visiting family in Yonkers, New York. Real death metal messiahs may know that city is home to Immolation and Mortician, but someone else important lives there too. One weekend in late fall '95, I'm 13 and I'm in the Sam Goody record store in Cross County. It's this kind of outdoor shopping center sort of thing. I'm buying Hotter Than Hell, Kiss, and as I'm walking out, I see this bulletin board type of thing with what I learned to be flyers on it, like show flyers. And one of the logos that stuck out was for the band Breakdown, who, yes, they hail from Yonkers too. That and this symbol, which I didn't know what it meant at the time, but it was this big X with the letters N, Y, H, and C near it. Then I got in trouble one time for drawing on the chalkboard in my 8th grade social studies class. It wouldn't be until about a year later, and please, for any NYHC vets that may be watching, I beg you not to hold me to exact dates here, because I could be off by 7 or 8 months or so with respect to different releases being used as reference points in this video, but yeah, it wasn't until about a year or so later that I actually got to hear Breakdown. But to quote one of my favorites of all time, no redeeming social value in the song Hockey, New York hardcore absolutely kicked my ass in '97 when I picked up a copy of In Effect magazine, no redeeming on the cover, and read all about bands like SUBZERO, MADBALL, WARZONE, Agnostic Front, etc. So with the quickness and from the same store, Newberry Comics in the south end of Nashua, I went back and bought Set It Off MADBALL, then Demonstrating My Style not long after that. And those two albums were really my introduction as to what hardcore sounded like, because up till that point, what dominated my CD player was Kiss, Iron Maiden, Danzig, White Zombie, Pantera, GNR, and some, quote, extreme stuff like the Identity and Metal Meister compilations when I slowly started getting into that kind of thing. But one band in particular, actually someone I'd first heard on the Identity 2 comp, MERAUDER, had a completely new, like, well, yes, identity for hardcore with what seemed like a way heavier sound to their guitars, and these vocals that were just absolutely dangerous. Like the kind where you're like, I don't know if I ever want to meet that guy in real life. The ironic part of that statement being that I've since conversed with George and he's nice as pie. Alright, so enter what some label metalcore, but we're only gonna cite the early stuff, because truthfully, I really don't know much, if any, past like 99, so perhaps you could even chalk this up as a kind of, I'll tell you what actual metalcore is type of thing. I say that while laughing, just in case any zoomies might see this and think I'm being serious about that. So okay, yes, why might some scholars and historians call bands like MERAUDER metalcore? What's metal about it, and or what's not hardcore about it? Dude, without convoluting or cutting stuff up with all sorts of unnecessary precision, I'm saying it's the guitars, man. Just press play on Master Killer, the first song, Time Ends, and then go to a metal release shortly before it, World Demise, Obituary, and do the same thing, first song, Don't Care, and tell me they don't sound more similar to each other than either do to Set It Off MADBALL or Lower East Side Warzone. Also a big separator stylistically, the beats. MADBALL, Agnostic Front, No Redeeming, Warzone, tons of that like DB-esque punk beat thing, because that's hugely where hardcore came from. Some even insist on calling it hardcore punk. Fine by me. But by contrast, and as a matter of fact, that like punk beat, not one single trace of it anywhere on Master Killer, nowhere. Now let's stay in the New York hardcore scene for a second and move over to another band with guitars more in common with MERAUDER and Obituary, at least to my ears, but who do still use that punk beat, though not as often as MADBALL, but it's still used. BIOHAZARD. Just listen to the title track, first song off State of the World Address from '94, and that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Internet nerds, the kind that love categorizing stuff, maybe unnecessarily, who I ain't slagging on, man. Every music freak's cool by me, even the biggest of shit talkers. But it seems they will often call Marauder metalcore and BIOHAZARD hardcore. So is it not the guitars that's the separator, but instead the beat? For the record, I identify both bands as hardcore, Marauder and BIOHAZARD, the same way as MADBALL, 25 to Life, and Come Incorrect, any of that, but whose guitar tones are still pretty different. And I'm not denying the existence of metalcore as if to do one of those like, oh, it's all the same type of things, but I still think there's enough in common musically to call all those bands hardcore, while those in the separate field I'll touch on in a second could, yes, in fact, more accurately be considered metalcore. Just because song structure-wise, the following really ain't very much like the aforementioned. Let me also state while I'm at it, yeah, back to my resume for a second, that I eventually started listening to stuff outside of New York and nearby Connecticut and Massachusetts. Bands I've become obsessed with, like Blood for Blood, Death Threat. What's up, CJ? He's a subscriber who, sir, if you're seeing this right now, it is a frigging insane honor to have your viewership. I can't thank you enough for playing at all the Death Threat shows I had a blast at. This is full-on Wayne and Garth, I'm not worthy. But yeah, so 100 Demons, Cold as Life. Alright, now we're in Michigan, but you get the point. Alright, so the next slew of bands I'm gonna cite, I'll preface it like this, and I'm merely just gonna say their name. I'm gonna ID these bands as being what I'd consider very legitimate, true contenders to, if an argument's gonna exist about what the seeds of metalcore were. These are a handful of them that vary in size, like in terms of popularity. So veterans, I'm sure you're up on all of them, but anyone younger, if you're interested in the roots, peep 40 Days Rain, CANNAE, C-A-N-N-A-E. Man, you want to hear maybe one of the meanest metally hardcore songs ever written? White Walls Reap Black Figures. Holy hell, anybody that knows that song knows exactly the part I'm talking about. Overcast, who also features Brian Fair from Shadows Fall. Aftershock, who included John DONAIS, currently playing guitar in Anthrax. One King Down, the Bloodlust Revenge EP. Vision of Disorder, their self-titled debut. And the For the Bleeders EP, an imprint right after it. And piecemeal, somewhere between Crucifixion and Resurrection lies Redemption. That's a somewhat varied list in terms of sound, but ultimately they all have more in common with each other than just straight hardcore, or that kind that has the Obituary and Entombed-ish guitars like Marauder and BIOHAZARD. Although I just gotta issue a disclaimer, due to the perhaps criminal nature, and I mean that in a cool criminal kind of way, of some in their younger years and some of those bands that might not appreciate being put in the same list as others, my descriptions are limited only to music and nothing outside of it. For example, I'll just say that a live Piecemeal show was vastly different than that of a CANNAE show. CANNAE, who once played a small rec center sort of place in my town and brought a whole bunch of their Boston crew, and then the owner cut the power midway through their set when like, ah, wait a minute, actually no, that was DIECAST set. Yeah, now that I think about it, that was during DIECAST set, that's right. Anyway, CANNAE and DIECAST got a show shut down in Nashville once when all hell broke loose on the dance floor. Only the truth is that the owner just wasn't used to seeing moshing as nuttily as what all those guys were doing, so it was controlled, but apparently it was too crazy for the venue. I don't know. So yeah, man, shortly after this period of time is when that Euro metal influence, specifically In Flames and At the Gates, really started being used quite heavily in local scenes, because you had stuff like HAMARTIA pop up. The Year of Our Lord started getting really big around then. What's up, Matt Lacasse? I always hope you're doing well. The What a Horrible Night to Have a Curse demo, Black Dahlia Murder, who I hear people ripping on that band, and full transparency, that demo is the only thing by them that I know. I got it at what was possibly the very first Black Dahlia show ever, 2001 in Mr. Muggs in Ypsilanti, Michigan, but the songs on that EP are mean, man. I get the feeling it doesn't sound like anything they might have put out afterward. But then, when people started ripping off those bands to the point of sickness, who was it that formed as a sort of back to basics type of thing, but this time went totally overboard with the break break down parts and just tons of fun. Bury Your Dead, and then came all their thousands of rip-offs, and truthfully by that point I'd sort of stopped following a lot of new stuff, so I couldn't tell you much about what metalcore might have sounded like at that point. Because if memory serves, I think like keyboards and textures and layers and shit started getting thrown in, so I don't know, I was all about Dance of Death, Iron Maiden in 2003, and Angel of Retribution, Priest in 04, so someone educate me now, please. So yeah, dude, coming from somebody who spent many of his teenage years going to smaller shows, many in Massachusetts, a few in Connecticut, a smaller number in New Hampshire, and who bought their music either at those shows or from indie places like Rocket Records or Newberry Comics. That's my studied observation as to how a genre that today kind of has a bad name due to how strangely altered and duplicated it got, kind of a copy of a copy of a copy type thing, to the point that it's already been pretty replaced by things like slam. I guess what I'm trying to say is, in terms of its live existence, regardless of its sound, it all came from the same period when everything was DIY, and big money hadn't gotten its hands onto it yet to commercialize it and make it all radio friendly, so yeah, man. So yeah, check out CANNAE and OVERCAST is what I'm saying, I guess. So alright, my friends, I hope you all had a great new year and things are looking good for you so far. I mean that. And if you did like this video, cool, maybe you can give it a thumbs up. Or if you just like hearing somebody bullshit about heavy metal, then Obituary and Marauder your ass right into that subscribe button. And we'll see you next time on Concrete Spew. But until then, later, psychos.